Good morning, everyone. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So today I thought we could continue to move through the Anapanasati Sutta, the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 118, which is one of the seminal suttas, and the Buddha designated breath meditation as the abode of the Tathagata, which was his epithet for himself. So this was a meditation he recommended highly, and it's extremely a robust system. And this sutta is organized into 16 steps, so it's extremely wide-ranging and versatile, and there's a huge amount of depth in there. The 16 steps are divided into 4 sections of 4 steps each. Each group is called a tetrad, and the tetrads are roughly correspond to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. That is, mindfulness of the body, and that's the first tetrad, the first 4 steps. Mindfulness of feelings, which is the second 4 steps. Mindfulness of mind, of chitta, mind-heart, which is the third 4 steps. And then mindfulness of dhammas, which can be translated as mental qualities or Dhamma categories, which is the final 4 steps. So the Buddha said that this sutta, when brought to fulfillment, when this practice was brought to fulfillment, fulfilled the 4 foundations of mindfulness, fulfilled the 7 awakening factors, fulfilled true knowledge and liberation. So it's a good thing to do. In the previous few weeks, we've moved through the first, I believe, 8 steps, the first 2 tetrads. So we'll move through them again, but more quickly, and settle into the third tetrad, steps, I believe, 9 through 12. The beginning point of the sutta is the direction to establish one's body in an erect position. And this is very important. I think at the beginning of meditation, to very consciously move one's awareness up through the vertebrae one by one, straightening, gently curving the lumbar in, and allowing the chest to open, the neck to soften, the spine to straighten, and allowing that erect posture to energize the body and the mind, as if one's entire spine and body are being suspended from a thread from the crown of the head down, effortless but energized. To sit with dignity might be a good way to intuitively feel what this is directing one to. And then one brings one's mindfulness to the fore and begins to observe the breath, and specifically with regards to its length at first. So the first two steps of the sutta are breathing in short, one nose, I breathe in short, breathing out short, one nose, I breathe in short, breathing out long, one nose, I breathe in long, or out long, breathing in long, one nose, I breathe out long, something like that. And basically, this is the ability to not only focus our awareness, which might be quite scattered by really trying to note the length of each breath a bit, but also it's the opportunity to just work with those very basic rhythms of the breath in a way that can feel comfortable. So frequently an instruction one gets in the West is to not try to control the breath, but we are controlling creatures and frequently come out of a day of movement with a lot of residual momentum and intention. And if we just tell ourselves to not control the breath, that tendency to control moves under the surface and will continue to operate, but it'll just clench everything up. So in the beginning, it can be much better to actually consciously work with that instinct to control. And one can adjust their breath to feel more comfortable. Instead of just noting whether it's long or short, one can note whether it's comfortable or uncomfortable and adjust the lengths to maybe slow down a little bit and calm. As one gets calm and settles into that, and for the record, before entering into mindfulness of breathing, taking 5 or 10 minutes of metta, loving kindness practice is very helpful. My teacher recommends starting every meditation session with metta, with loving kindness meditation. But once one is settled into this a bit, the mind may become quieter, and the breaths will most likely become more subtle, a bit shorter, and subtle, shallow in a way, but not in a tight way, rather just less movement over time. But sometimes that takes a long time. In the meantime, the third step of the sutta is to breathe in and out, training thus. I will breathe in sensitive to the whole body. I will breathe out sensitive to the whole body. And we've spoken of this step. It's a pivotal one before. The commentaries and later tradition took it to mean the whole breath of the whole body of the breath at the tip of the nose, which led to an interpretation of concentration which was extremely constricted to one point. There's a great deal of scholarship now by Bhante Analayo, Ajahn Jeff, Ajahn Sucitto, and many others, pointing to the fact that the Buddha really was pointing to rather an awareness of the whole body as such, and cultivating a wide awareness. One can think of what it meant to be present and focused in the time of the Buddha, when people were living in the forest and subject to dangers there. And if you've been in the forest, you know that as soon as the awareness gets constricted to one point or one feature of that environment, you've lost the plot. You've shut down your ability to be receptive to new danger or stimulus. And so this sort of thinking of what it would mean to be fully present in the forest with your awareness in all directions, this is a good approximation of actually perhaps more what we're going for when we speak of unification of mind in the Buddhist context. So as modern inhabitants of this unbelievably stimulated world, we are very much trapped in our heads, and the bodies seem to be these things that keep our necks from dragging on the ground. But it's important to be able to work to cultivate this whole bodied awareness by dropping the awareness into the body, the torso, relaxing the diaphragm. And it can be useful to find an expedient means of that: exercise, qigong, um, some such practice. And specifically in this third step, what one can do is consciously move one's awareness in a progression through three chambers in the body. The upper chamber, which encompasses the sort of the head, and just establish one's awareness broadly there while one breathes in and out. And then as soon as that loses its interest or luster, the awareness should naturally drop to the torso, and that's the second chamber. And then the third chamber is more around the belly button, and what the Eastern traditions call the Dantian. And then once one has come to that lower chamber, then expanding the awareness to encompass the whole body and breathing there, and then just repeating that. And one can, if one wants to use visualizations, one can visualize light coursing down through the crown of the head, down through the toes, and other visualizations or perceptions which can help. And I've spoken of those more in previous talks. The fourth step is to calm the bodily, what in Pali is referred to as sankhara, which can be translated as formations or energies. So once one has become sensitive to the body, one calms it. So what that can really mean is the breaths will become more subtle, and the moment between the breaths, which one may become more sensitive to, become substantial as well, and the awareness becomes very fluid and can track the breath through that whole in and out process without breaking at the exhale and inhale. And for me, that manifests not only as when one is aware of this sort of full body and the bodily energy, the breath energy as they call, circulating, namely up the spine and down the front, and one will get a feel of that movement over time. One can feel knots in that subtle body and feel them relaxing, points of tension or points of sort of where we squeeze when we breathe, sort of physical places where we feel like we have to engage in movement to make the breath go in and out. And those will naturally calm, and we can also consciously calm them. And the breath will begin to be subtle, delicate, and less tied to these sort of coarse bellows of the lungs. The breathing becomes delicate and refined. And in tandem with that sensitivity to this bodily energy moving through the what are referred to as the meridians up the spine, down the front of the body, in tandem with that, one may become increasingly sensitive to the breath at the tip of the nose at this point. And it can oscillate between the two awarenesses, and eventually come to encompass both at the same time. It's been compared to a spider at the center of a web. So you find the point on your body where the breath feels prominent, for example, the tip of the nose. but then you're also aware at the same time of the whole body, like a spider at one point in the web, but aware of the movements or vibrations throughout the entire web. So when one begins to track the breath at the nose as well, at this point, if that's what feels correct, then that refining and calming of the mental fabrication or the bodily formations, the bodily energies occurs as well. And Bhante Analayo compares this to a condor which begins to glide on thermals. The first few steps of the sutta involving breathing in and out are like the condor flapping its wings. But at this stage, it's just gliding without flapping its wings. There's a smooth, refined quality to it, almost as if one is tracking a thin silk thread at the nose, or if one's awareness oscillates to a broader scope encompassing the whole body, then the bodily energy begins to feel more refined as well. And this leads us to the next tetrad, the next 4 steps, which is one becomes sensitive to piti, P-I-T-I, which is the Pali word which is sometimes translated as rapture, but is perhaps better translated as refreshment, because it's associated with the Pali word for to drink. And this, in my estimation, is the sense of this subtle breath energy flowing around the body, and providing a sense of deep refreshment. When one becomes aware of this energy and more attuned to it, then it's coursing up the spine, down the front of the body, and moving into different parts of the body where it has previously been exiled from. Begins to feed and nourish parts of ourselves we did not realize were dry. This will happen naturally as one just becomes aware of this breathing, but one can also cultivate it actively. For example, establishing when one moves through these 3 chambers, one can also experiment with putting one's awareness in the left or the right side of the body in each of the chambers, and one will usually find that one side of the body is numb, and over time, by placing one's awareness more and more into that side of the body, one can cultivate that sensitivity to that numbness and bring the breath energy and that nourishment there as well. Similarly, one can imagine light, the breath as light coming into, say, the back of the body, the kidneys or the shoulder blades, sort of a bright mist oscillating in and out with the breath. And that can really feed these parts of ourselves which have been quite dry. So, through all these steps, the refrain of the Mindfulness of Breathing Sutta is breathing in, or he trains thus, breathing in, I, say, become sensitive to rapture, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. It's there at every step. So at each of these steps, the breath should be peripherally in the background. It's one's anchor and should never be let go of completely. And similarly, when the Buddha spoke about moving through stages of concentration, he frequently referenced the image of a cow moving up a hillside. And this was usually used to illustrate the fact that one doesn't want to jump too quickly. One becomes established and really immersed in one step, really becoming, say, sensitive to the bodily energies, or really allowing the sense of refreshment to flow before moving on to a different step. However, I think there's another interesting implication. The cow has 4 feet, and when it walks, 3 of those feet are touching the ground at any one time, or at least 2. And for me, these steps usually don't occur in isolation. One frequently is straddling about 3 and moving. Sometimes the mind will move into the next one and then move back, and then before moving completely forward again. So one may become sensitive to the whole body in step 4, and that can be one sort of note, like whole body, and really remaining aware of that broad scope. But as one remains aware of that broad spectrum, that awareness of the energy's flow becomes more and more discernible, and one begins to sense the refreshment that comes from that. And so the awareness will move to that briefly, but then it may return back to just the whole body for a time before moving forward again, and so on. So it's okay to be broadly straddling some of these steps and oscillating a little bit at times. It's just fine and natural. So the Buddha compared this 5th step of becoming sensitive to rapture or to refreshment to a lake with cool water bubbling up from below. And this sense of refreshment coming up will steadily pervade until and the sense of refreshment is a good litmus test for if one is approaching the first 4 steps correctly. If the body is being appropriately looked to and the awareness of it cultivated, then the sense of refreshment should be coming up. And if not, then expedient means for refining the breath energy can be helpful, like qigong, and cold showers is something I frequently recommend, though I'm not sure how many people take me up on that. But as this refreshment circulates, this breath energy moves, then the body does become fed and nourished. And the next step occurs, which is one becomes sensitive to pleasure. One breathes in and out, sensitive to pleasure. Sukha. And sukha here is a more static sensation. Refreshment is a formation. It moves. It's tied up with intention, so it's very dynamic. It moves through the body, through these meridians. But sukha is the sense that one is saturated and full, and the stillness begins to occur as one feels fed, and things settle. And at this point, a different nimittas, or signs, as they're known, can occur. So light may begin to manifest in one's field of vision, brightness, or if one has cultivated the sound of silence, vague hissing or ringing in the ears, which one can hear at any time, that may become prominent. But light is very common. And it's okay to turn one's mind to this as a sense of sukha, as the pleasure, as long as one also keeps the breath in the background. But usually this object will be more stable, static, still, and bright. And this can occur in the context of that full body, but frequently the awareness will oscillate back to the one point, the spider at the center of the web, to say the breath at a very refined level, and it'll be able to track it very carefully. And this stage can be disorienting, because it's as if one has stepped onto a mountaintop and the atmosphere is extremely thin, and all the coarse ways of thought and concept which we orient ourselves with every day without even knowing it have been calmed and somewhat disappeared, and we can feel a bit at a loss. So at this stage it's quite frequent for the mind wants to calm down, but it's common also for sort of knots of intention and concept and thought to try to manifest in that sort of newly emptied space. And this leads to the seventh step, which is one becomes sensitive to chitta sankhara, which is mental formations or mental energies. And as one has cultivated this sense of stillness, this static, unmoving pleasure, it serves as a backdrop on which these mental formations and energies play very discernibly and visibly. So one can see clearly when a coarse line of thought arises in this context. And similarly, one can see the corresponding knot of intention or bodily tension, which arises usually in tandem with our verbal thoughts, though we don't usually notice it. Frequently, this manifests in the head as a sort of tightness there. And these perceptions and feelings, this is chitta sankhara, and this step is becoming sensitive to it, and it will happen naturally. The eighth step is to calm that chitta sankhara. And this can either mean really just allowing that calm sense of sukha, of pleasure, to grow, and naturally these things to relax. But for me, I find, if anyone here has ever used trigger points, what it is when you have a knot in the muscle, you can press it very hard and it'll hurt, but then it'll release and be extremely relaxed. And with me, similarly, with these chitta sankhara, these sort of mental knots that form, I find actually allowing the mind to go to them, and it may clench around them briefly and then relax. So one thing you might find is a mental tension arising in the head, and allowing the mind to go there to briefly clench, and then it should relax and drop back down to the heart area, or the nose and heart area, which is more its natural home. But that is one way that this calming can occur. That's one way that this calming can occur. I think I just dropped out. Okay, we're good. I think we're still recording, are we? Yeah, okay. Which brings us to, I know this is a lot, the third tetrad, steps 9 through 12. And in this tetrad, it corresponds to the third foundation of mindfulness, mindfulness of mind, of chitta, which is the mind-heart. So in this tetrad, the first step is that one breathes in and out, training that one is sensitive to the mind. And it's difficult to know what that means. But my sense is that as these mental events, these mental sankhara, these mental formations have calmed in the previous step, it's as if they are calligraphy playing on a canvas. And the canvas, which becomes more and more visible as these shapes that were on it fade. And soon it's just the canvas. And that can be disorienting at first, but it's a bright space. And it's still and broad and unified. So one can become sensitive to that, the backdrop. One can turn one's attention less and less from these brief moments of tension, these brief trains of thought, and more to the background strata or hum, and reside in that. And the next step is to focus on gladdening the mind, abhipomadayang. And the root of that word, abhipomadayang, is mud, which means soft. But this gladdening, when one's mind has come to this place, it's extremely malleable. And even a brief perception dropped in there has a huge effect. So it can be disorienting at first to be left with this blank canvas when one is so used to shapes and the play of coarse objects on the canvas, on the words. But then if one, say, drops in a thought of metta, of loving kindness, just the word, and at this point one really may not have, the mind might be calm enough, it doesn't want to engage in a huge visualization or a huge phrase of metta, but rather just a word, love. Or maybe just bringing one's mind awareness to the heart area and cultivating a perception of light. Or maybe just the head area and a perception of light. You can experiment. But that brightness will pervade the whole canvas extremely quickly, and it'll brighten the whole situation and provide one with a sense that there is a robust foundation there. It's as if one initially feels they're stepping into a void, but then you realize it's a doorway. Or one is stepping towards this blank canvas, but then one drop of bright gold colors placed on it, and it pervades the whole thing. And the Buddha repeatedly said this, that happy mind is easily concentrated. And Longpo Pasano is fond of saying that we usually have it all backwards. We think that once we have samadhi, unification of mind, we'll be happy. But it's that when we're happy, that's when unification of mind can occur. So we brighten the mind as much as we're able to here. And it's lovely because these beautiful perceptions can take. I know Ajahn Brahm characterizes breath meditation as one first follows the breath, then the breath becomes the beautiful breath, and then it's just the beautiful. And perhaps the beautiful is where we've arrived here. The next step is to calm the mind, samadahang. And after this brightness of mind and heart pervades, then things can just still and grow calmer, which leads to this 12th step, which is to liberate the mind. And this could be looked at as moving, in the highest sense of actual liberation from a place of calm. And the Anapanasati Sutta does take one there. So looking at it in those terms is not amiss. But for many of us, it may have more to do with another interpretation of this third tetrad that Ajahn Jeff puts forward, which is the idea that when one has arrived here, one takes stock of where the mind is at and applies any one of those three trainings of gladdening, of calming, or of liberating to where one's mind is. So if one's mind feels dull, then one can gladden it. If one's mind is too overly restless, one calms it. If one's mind is stuck on an object, one begins to see the stress of maintaining that object and liberates it from that stress and moves on or calms to a deeper level. So there's a lot here. But I think it's good to remember that what we're doing is creating a space or a point of stillness. Thomas Merton said that monastics are the still point around which the world turns. And I think that might be a bit biased, as he was a Trappist monk, but I think a corollary is meditation is the still point around which our world and our lives turn. And dukkha, the Buddhist word for suffering, is etymologically related to a wheel, an axle of a wheel that's slightly off and wobbles. Du is bad, ka is this axle. And as long as we have this wobbly, off-kilter axle, then everything in our life is compromised. And there's a swaying and a lack of direction. But if we can cultivate this still point, this quiet place, then all this external movement becomes potentized. The wheel turns quickly. And as with any gyroscope or wheel moving at a high speed, it moves straight and on course. And this is the strange paradox of the practice, is that as we become more still, as we step away from the habitual activity which so much of the world uses to distract itself, then our true energies become liberated and accessible, and our lives and the goodness we can do become potentized. People can see our moving towards more seclusion, our stepping away from the dinner party a little early to meditate, as a withdrawing. But what it in effect does is it allows us a spiritual grounding from which the rest of our lives can move and orient around. And then every reaction we have is imbued with that. And this is the difference you see between the countless political actors in history who have lived lives that were in service of an ideal, but ultimately did not transcend that ideal, and those who've affected change from a place of spiritual transcendence. The Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa. We sense intuitively that difference, and that is accessible to all of us. But it requires the daily discipline and practice of grounding ourselves in these basic steps. So that's 20 minutes a day, if one can do it. Or it's 45 minutes a day, if one can cultivate that. It's stepping away on lunch break for 5 minutes to follow the breath for a little bit. It's taking very seriously our duty and opportunity as practitioners to cultivate a bright spot and an anchor so that we can truly serve the world. And what we're really doing is we are creating a space where a larger note can resonate. And the world is starved for that note. So, there's no goal more worthy. And these basic instructions are not an abstract undertaking, but rather the heart of what we have as our duty to do. So we have some time for questions, if those listening have them. It's good to see everyone. Karina, what a beautiful journey you describe. Thank you. Can you speak about how to emerge from meditation? I find it difficult to lift my energy up to daily interaction again for about an hour or two. That's a good question. I think giving oneself some time to orient and re-enter, maintaining the breath throughout, being okay being quiet too. I think establishing boundaries with those you live with and being, saying, look, in the mornings I need some quiet a bit more, and steering towards a bit of seclusion is okay. Listening to a Dhamma talk's a nice way to come out of things. But otherwise, one might have to figure that one out. Those are some of the things I just think of off the top of my head. But when one comes out of meditation, really reviewing what worked and then making an intention to maintain that mindfulness if possible. And I believe my cousin Jimmy, who was here last week, said that he'd been cultivating 20 minutes of breath meditation a day. I don't think he's here right now, but... Oh, hi, Hana. But he asked what else he could do apart from 20 minutes. And I'd say in addition, a upping that a bit is good. If one can take a retreat at some points, it's very helpful. Listening to some Dhamma talks, uh, and if one gets a chance to step into a monastery for a while, it can be hugely helpful. And otherwise, just finding some practitioners and people to sit with and support one in this path. It's very helpful. Hana says the concept of being sensitive to seems to bear a lot of weight. Can you speak more to how you think of cultivating sensitivity? First, it's good to see you, Hana and Ben, old friends. I'd say that this is the quintessential balance of this practice, is there needs to be intention enough to keep the awareness within the proper bounds, but of, say, each of these tetrads corresponds to one of the foundations. So for the first 4 steps, the body, the breath length, the bodily subtle energy flowing up and down. So that's one's domain. And one needs to maintain enough intention that that is where the mind is being kept. And it will wander, and if that happens, one smilingly brings it back. It just happens, it's fine. But then applying too much intention is problematic. So within those bounds of the body, allowing it room to do what it needs to do. So sometimes that can just manifest as with that step of the whole body, for example, awareness, sensitive to the whole body. One can establish the scope of the awareness, but then relax. And there's a term in Buddhist thought called directed thought and evaluation. And what that can mean is the sort of applying of a perception or direction to the mind, and then the tasting of it and receptive part. So that's the active and receptive dynamic at play. And it's frequently compared to ringing a bell and then listening to its resonance. So what that can manifest as is, say, saying whole body, to be with the whole body, or breath, if one wants to be with the breath, and then not saying anything. Because one thing people will do sometimes with a mantra is go breath, 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 and it's too overbearing. So really applying a perception, but then stepping back and just letting that perception resonate for a while and tasting it, seeing how it affects the body. And one other helpful thing is when one uses these verbal directions to phrase them as questions, it's much more gentle. So one can say, can I be aware of the breath? Or where do I feel the breath? What way of breathing feels good or pleasant? Some would say that that is the evaluation, that verbal aspect, but I find it's just also the more helpful way of pointing the mind for us overbearing, modern, slightly neurotic people. So anyways, it's good to see you both, Ben and Hana. Okay, I think that's the time we have. I'm grateful for everyone here, and just it's very heartening to be on this path with people like this. It's rare you find those willing to tune into a live stream on a Friday morning, but this is our most important work, and it's simple in a certain sense and basic, and And yet these practical instructions for how one cultivates the mind are a great gift, and also branch across traditions as well. I mean, there's centering prayer in Christianity as well. So I hope everyone has a good weekend. Stay safe, and see you all next week.